Hi, this is Bob Odell with RootSource. If you've listened to the lessons of Avi Lipkin on the topic of Islam, you've heard Avi refer to such terms as the harlot, Babylon, and the one world government. Well, today we're going to explore that very topic in much greater detail with our guest, Troy Anderson, who is a Pulitzer Prize nominated investigative journalist and co-author of a new book with Paul McGuire called The Babylon Code. Welcome to RootSource, Troy.
Thank you for asking me on.
Well, tell us a little bit about your career path in journalism.
When I was very young, my grandmother told me about one of my ancestors, Friedrich von Schiller. He's a famous poet and playwright. He wrote the poem Ode to Joy that Beethoven set to music in the Ninth Symphony. And he wrote the plays William Tell, Maria Stuart, The Robbers, and The Maid of Orleans. And so she told me all about him and encouraged me to become a writer and sort of follow in his footsteps. So from an early age, I wrote hundreds of poems and songs, and I went to the University of Oregon. I grew up in Oregon and studied journalism. And then I spent the next couple decades working at different newspapers, some small ones, and then the Los Angeles Daily News and the Press Enterprise in California. And then I freelanced for magazines and Reuters for a few years and became executive editor of Charisma magazine in late 2014. And
now, Troy, now that's quite a change, going from secular media to Christian media. Can you tell us about how that came about?
Yeah, so when I was 11, a youth pastor who had actually trained under Hal Lindsey at the UCLA the Light and Powerhouse Seminary, he and a bunch of Jesus people came to my hometown in Oregon. My dad owned a fish cannery, and we met him at a restaurant, and he invited me to join the Royal Rangers and the youth group, Assemblies of God Church in our hometown. So he told me all about Bible prophecy and gave me a copy of the late great Planet Earth, and I became a Christian. And so this was sort of planted from an early age. I was very interested in this topic, and then so then I spent a couple of decades in mainstream media, secular journalism. And then in 2007 or 8, assistant pastor at our church suggested, he goes, why don't you try to why don't you freelance on the side for some Christian magazines? Because I was interested in using my talents to serve the Lord. And so I started writing for Christianity Today and Charisma and a number of other different outlets on the side. And that just sort of progressed over the years to this move into Christian journalism and this book that we written, The Babylon Code.
Well, it's great to have you on today, and it's also great to have someone who's been involved in investigative journalism in, I think, the Christian media. What was the story for which you were nominated?
Yeah, I wrote about over 100 different stories about the foster care system when I was at the Los Angeles Daily News. This is back in 2003, 2004, and the stories looked at uncovered these financial incentives in the not only the local and state foster care system, but the national foster care system, where for each kid they put in foster care, the government gets anywhere from, I think it was $15,000 to $150,000 a year. And there's some other stuff we found out, that there was all kinds of sort of people driving around in nice cars and taking lavish vacations and that kind of deal. And ultimately, actions were taken by the state in California and Florida. That also, and President Bush sent his the administrator for Child and Family Services to come visit me in my office, and they congratulated me on uncovering this. And the county actually sent tens of thousands of kids back home, and they admitted that many of these children didn't need to be in foster care, and so they considered it revolutionary reforms, and phenomenal success is what people had called it. And so anyways, I was nominated for a Pulitzer Prize for those series of stories back in 2004. And then Ali Walker, who's an actress, she did a documentary about it, and that won some film festival awards.
You know, I think it's great to hear stories of Christians who are making an impact in the secular media, as you have. It's also great to have your talents in the area of Christian writing. And your book, The Babylon Code, which you co-authored with Paul McGuire, talks about solving the Bible's greatest end times mystery, that of Babylon. So tell us, what is, in a nutshell, what is the mystery of Babylon?
Yeah, so the mystery Babylon is a term you'll find it in the King James version of Book of Revelation 17 and 18, refers to mystery Babylon the Great. And this has been a sort of a biblical riddle or a puzzle that has mystified Bible scholars and theologians for hundreds and hundreds of years, and there's been much speculation over what this what the Apostle John was referring to there. And what we talk about in the Babylon Code is that there's this prophetic mystery that begins in Genesis and culminates in Revelation, and it involves Babylon. And so Babylon, in the first mention of Babel is the Tower of Babel in the story of Nimrod. And this is actually the first attempt to create a worldwide, political, economic, religious system. And Nimrod is considered the archetype of the Antichrist. And then Babylon reemerges in the books of the prophets with, King Nebuchadnezzar and the Jews being exiled to Babylon, and plays a pretty predominant role throughout the entire Bible. And then, returns in the book of Revelation as mystery Babylon. And so it starts in Genesis and culminates in Revelation with this mysterious system or a cult-based system that John refers to as Mystery Babylon and Babylon the Great.
Right, and I have really enjoyed the book and the perspective that you give. One of the things that you talk about with regard to Babel originally and Nimrod is you contrast Nimrod with Semiramis. So can you tell our listeners what is that about?
Yeah, so I mean the Bible does mention Nimrod as this sort of this tyrant, this figure that convinces people to build the Tower of Babel, and he builds ancient Babylon. And then there are sort of vague references to Semiramis, in other parts of the Bible, but it's not. Her name is not actually mentioned in the Bible, and she's a controversial figure. There's some extra biblical books that talk about her, and of course, different writings over the centuries, and so whether she actually existed or not, nobody could be certain. But the idea is that either she was the mother or the wife of Nimrod, and plays a role sort of like she's supposedly the queen of Babylon, and the originator of the mystery religions, the occult-based religions that began in ancient Babylon.
So we can see through the Bible some allusions to male and female personifications of evil, I guess. You could have like Ahab and Jezebel. Would Ahab and Jezebel be an example of that kind of pairing?
Yeah, I mean it's sort of the same kind of idea. I don't think they're connected. I mean the idea is that Nimrod and Semiramis were repeated in different famous figures in Egypt, in Greece and Rome, and stretching over time, that this idea that this occult mystery religions that began long ago, different cultures picked up different parts of it, and it sort of continued these pagan religions on down through the centuries and the millenniums.
Yeah, I certainly see that. You go to movies and you see the previews for various shows, and and you often get this idea of the strong male or the the strong female figure that's going to rule or has special skills or powers that are going to save us from ourselves.
Yeah, that's one of the legends surrounding Semiramis, is that either there's there's different stories about how Nimrod died, but that after his death, there's different stories about how his death and his the birth of Tammuz, their supposed son, was done supernaturally, and so it becomes sort of a main for the story of Jesus and Mary and Joseph, and so the occult religion sort of took this story, which is the seed of the woman promised in early parts of Genesis, and took it as their own story and sort of twisted the whole tale, and so there's that element of it also.
Yes, and we have listeners around the world, in English-speaking countries around the world. We have also quite a few in America. Now, in the book, you mention that these influences from Nimrod and Semiramis can be traced all the way down into the architecture of Washington, D.C. Can you explain that for us a little bit?
Yeah, so some of the architectural symbolism, you have the obelisk, which is a phallic symbol, and you have the dome, which is a symbol of the womb. And so you see this repeated throughout history. You see it in Egypt, you see it in Babylon, you see it in Rome, you see it in Greece, and you see it in modern America. We have those symbols, the Capitol in Washington, D.C., and the obelisk, and you have it in Rome and France and other parts of the world. So this is these symbols that date back to the stories of Nimrod and Semiramis are spread throughout the world, and they have to do with occult mystery religions and symbolism, and so, yeah, it's still very prominent today.
Is the Statue of Liberty in New York City involved in this, in your opinion?
We delve into that in the book, and so one of the questions about Mystery Babylon is is this sort of a code word in the Bible? Is John referring to something other than just actual Babylon? And so some of the theories is that Babylon or Mystery Babylon refers to America, or the European Union, or the Roman Catholic Church, or apostate Christianity, or maybe even the rebuilt Babylon or the ancient empire of Babylon in the Middle East. And one of the things that we talk about in the book is the people that designed the Statue of Liberty were Freemasons, and some of the images of the Statue of Liberty may have its inspiration with in ancient Babylon with Nimrod and Semiramis and some of the occult imagery that comes from that time. So there's speculation, not definitive proof, that the Statue of Liberty could be inspired ultimately by Semiramis. And so then the question would be, if that's true, could America be Mystery Babylon, or could be part of this end times political, economic, religious system that arises under the Antichrist and false prophet?
And I'm sure many people are asking that question as well. You talk in the book, you quote different researchers. Some say that Babylon is a symbol of that whole overall system, no matter where it is, and others will talk about the idea that Babylon will be rebuilt again someday. I want to know what you think is more likely, and if Babylon is to be rebuilt, do you have any idea, any guess as to how quickly in time, how many years from now that might happen?
Yeah, so I mean, the conclusion we come to is that Mystery Babylon and Babylon the Great refer to a worldwide system. Babylon the Great is referring to sort of the corrupt geopolitical commercial system that we now see arising all around us, in the world today. And with globalism and the push for global governance, these are all sort of euphemisms for world government. The globalists in the past, they would use the terms world government and that kind of thing, and then when they saw the backlash against that, they sort of changed their terms to globalism and global governance. And we just saw the United Nations take a vote, this big vote they did in September on sustainable development in this 2030 plan, which many believe is sort of a step towards this system. They had the Global Citizens Festival in New York City just a few months ago, attracted celebrities from around the world. There's sort of a public education campaign going on to teach children that they're global citizens, and so there's been this long-term push to sort of move us in this direction.
And what about the worldwide summit in Paris on climate change? Try to get all the nations to come together and agree on what they're going to do about it. Do you see that involved?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You've got the climate change agreement that just happened in Paris, and then you've got different treaties that are being passed, all kinds of new sort of supranational laws that sort of reduce the sovereignty of nations, especially they're targeting America and Israel, and so the push is there's sort of a very systematic plan that's being unveiled over a long period of time to sort of move us into this sort of gradually. That way people really don't realize what's happening, and by the time this thing ultimately is unveiled, it's probably too late. And so that's what motivated us to write this book. We wanted to wake people up that this is happening. Nobody knows for sure how soon this is going to happen, but we are sort of quickly moving in that direction. And so this is sort of we felt called by the Lord to write this book, and may turn into a docudrama film. We try to wake people up and alert people that it's time to turn back to God. There still is hope if we do what we're supposed to do, repent and turn back to the Lord.
Amen to that. And certainly that is the actionable conclusion of this, is that there is still time, there is still hope, and I'm completely with you there. Now, one of the things that you mentioned that caught me by surprise was the role of this Babylon in the founding of America, which you point back to Jamestown in 1607, which I do as well. But you talk about Francis Bacon and the role he played in that process. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about that, about what he did?
Yeah, so Francis Bacon is a famous English lawyer, philosopher, and statesman. He's believed to be the head of one of the world's most powerful secret societies that existed back at that time, the Rosicrucian Order. And then he also played a leading role in creating the British colonies, and he wrote a book called The New Atlantis. And so the idea was that he and others envisioned that America would one day become the new Atlantis, or the head of this, this utopian new world. And so the idea is that there's been this secret occult plan that's been, it was, essentially began in ancient Babylon with Nimrod, and at its root, this is a spiritual battle. This is a spiritual system. There's, satanic entities that are, operating in the background. That's why this thing can go on for thousands of years. But, so in the early 1600s, they envisioned America as being this new Atlantis, or this, the head of this global utopian world. And then one of the interesting things I turned up in my research on Francis Bacon is that figures from Mark Twain to Walt Whitman to Ralph Waldo Emerson and others believe that he was the actual real Shakespeare. I don't know if you saw this. There was a movie a couple years ago. I think it was called, I don't have the right page here, but there was a movie, looking into this speculation of different figures who may have been the real Shakespeare, and he was considered one of them. And so it's just a very interesting figure. And then, ultimately the Rosicrucian Order is believed to have sort of merged into the Bavarian Illuminati, which, may have become other different secret societies and clandestine organizations that have developed in the century since that time.
We're talking with Troy Anderson, co-author of The Babylon Code, about the Mystery Babylon. You said, Troy, that Babylon is the second most quoted city in the Bible. Is that correct?
Yeah, the second most quoted city in the Bible is Babylon, and of course, Jerusalem is the most mentioned city in the Bible. So it's rather surprising what predominant role that Babylon does play throughout the Bible. Most people probably didn't notice that or aren't aware of that, but it does play a significant role.
How do you contrast the city of Jerusalem with the city of Babylon?
So there's sort of two archetypal cities in the Bible. One is Jerusalem, the holy city, the city of God. It's a model of what the heavenly kingdom is going to be one day. And then you also have Babylon. It's the city of the devil. It's the megapolis of rebellion and opposition against God. And so these two cities throughout the Bible are sort of as a parallel between good and evil, and this conflict that runs this thread that runs all through the Bible.
It's interesting when we think about Babylon and we equate it to evil. There's no doubt when you look at Revelation and the description of Babylon, even as it's being destroyed, that people mourn over the fact of the beauty that was there and the impressive work of man that causes people to be in awe. And so there is that deception, I guess, that is in play with Babylon, because it looks pretty good from the outside, right?
Yeah, that's something that we turned up in our research on this, and this is probably one of the more mind-blowing things we discovered is that Babylon is the greatest deception probably in all of history. If America or sort of our modern society is sort of this end times Babylonian system, or at least emerging, it all appears very nice and affluent and prosperous and maybe even good, but in reality, if we look at it from God's perspective, it's just the opposite. It's this great deception. There's all this, sort of lies mixed in with the truth, and so it's rather disconcerting to discover that what we believed to be one thing is not quite the other, and what things may seem to be are not quite as they seem.
Sounds like the deception that we're experiencing in America right now. When you take God out of America, when you try to create a secular version of America, isn't that what you end up with, a Babylon?
Yeah, that's essentially what we see happening in America today. I mean, just look at the changes that have happened in the last several decades. Since they took prayer out of schools, we've seen the legalization of abortion, the rapid moral decline of our culture, the breakup of the family, rising crime levels. And now we've gotten to a state where the Judeo-Christian foundations of our nation have been upturned. They've legalized same-sex marriage, and now it just seems everything's in a complete free-for-all. And we've just witnessed this rapid transformation of our culture, and it's happened sort of slowly. So people warned of it. There was voices warning us that we're heading down the wrong path, but we didn't wake up, and now it's just a question of how much time do we have left until this whole thing falls apart, essentially.
In my visits to Israel, my quick equation might be that Tel Aviv is more like Babylon and Jerusalem is, well, Jerusalem. But I would add the perspective to our listeners that Jerusalem itself can feel like a spiritual battle zone. It has a certain dynamic. There is certainly a battle going on in the heavenlies regarding Jerusalem and what's there. It's really not Babylon, but I guess it's the spirit of Babylon, the worldly spirit, and there's simply a gigantic battle going on over Jerusalem. You can feel it when you go there, when you stay there for a while. You really get a sense of that. So we're going to continue our interview with Troy Anderson next week. So come back, and I can't wait for you to hear what he talks about in the second half.